Hey guys, welcome back. BDC Care here. We're back with Season 7, Episode 13 of our weekly Q&A. We missed last week, and I say missed, but we purposely didn't upload an episode last week for Blackout Tuesday, out of respect and solidarity. And we'll say that you can access this also on a lot of the podcasting platforms here at the top by checking out the description if you're on the video right now. But I think what we're also going to say is that we're going to start this episode talking about some of the recent events. Neither of us are black. This is, so this isn't necessary educational, listening for anyone. So we aren't a voice that necessarily needs to be heard in this space. We are speaking out in solidarity, but we understand if people don't feel the need to listen to this. For any number of reasons. I think it's important that people are educated, but this doesn't need to be that source, and we are not a source for education for this stuff. So we'll say that at the top. One of the other things that we'll say up at the top is a huge thank you to everybody who's been supporting us on Patreon, and the new Patreon that we have joining us this week, even, that we'll thank at the end. And what we've done is we pull the money from Patreon, it goes into a PayPal account. And we've donated the remainder of what's in that PayPal account, which was, I think, a little over 2 months worth of our Patreon to Black Lives Matter. Right. So, because we recognize that right now, we appreciate the support of everybody who's supporting us on Patreon, and that support means just as much, even if the money doesn't end up directly in our hands. And there's definitely people who could use the money more right now, and causes that it deserves to go to right now. Right. So for anybody who supported us on Patreon, thank you for a couple reasons, but that's where your money went, and I think that's a good cause, and I think that's something that hopefully everybody who is supporting us on Patreon can feel good about. And if not, with all due respect, you don't need to be continuing to support us on Patreon. That's I think true. That is something that we can unambiguously say is worthwhile to do. Yeah. So, yeah, a lot of stuff has been going on recently. Yes. And also, I should say, if anybody doesn't want to hear about this stuff, there's a decent chance that there will be a helpful commenter down in the comments with timestamps for stuff. So if you want to still hear the injustice stuff, but feel burnt out or feel like we're not the people to listen to on this topic, then you can see if there's a way to skip past that and get to the other parts too.
Yeah, because there's definitely a lot of, listen, there's a lot of injustice questions. My original intention was to put all the contemporary stuff at the end so it'd be easier for people who wanted to skip it. But we can't get past the fact that we did take last week off. This is happening right now as we speak in our world. And maybe as a starting point, and then we'll put some of the long form stuff at the end. Yeah. I think the starting point to me that really illustrates what's changed this week is the NFL. And Colin Kaepernick was a backup quarterback for San Francisco 49ers, but he'd also, I think, played a pivotal role in the year that they won the Super Bowl. I don't know. I don't really follow the NFL. I know he's been blackballed for it. And the reason why he's blackballed was because he started by sitting during the national anthem, and then after consulting with a Green Beret, he started taking the knee, so kneeling down during the national anthem instead of standing. And lots of people complaining at the time. They were saying, you can protest, don't do it during the game. You can protest, don't do it at work. Or some people were even saying, don't protest, it's disrespectful for the flag. And I think that was probably one of the stupidest comments. And a lot of people were saying it, but when people go on a hunger strike, they're not being disrespectful to food. Yeah. They are doing something, not eating, to make a statement to bring attention to something else.
And for the number of people that wear American flag tank tops and stuff, right, and do a lot of the stuff that you already aren't supposed to do with the flag, right? Or people have American flag picnic blankets, and that's seen as in some way patriotic, right? If we're trying to obey the sort of arbitrary rules of what respecting the flag are, right? Then there's a lot of people a lot closer to home who aren't doing it for a cause that are worth coming after first.
Right. And there actually are regulations. I know I've read in the States, I don't know about Canada, there's regulation or laws against wearing the flag as clothing. Yeah. So it's just interesting. So, and I guess the other part of it too that you see come up a lot in memes is that basically the people have been told, don't protest like this, don't protest like that. Don't be too in your face, don't be too offensive, don't be too there's just it's never a right moment to do it, right?
Yeah, and usually what it boils down to is make it easier to ignore, right?
Right.
In some way or another. And that's not always the explicit messaging, right? But that's always what ends up happening. What they're advocating for is always something that is easier to ignore, right? Even if you're explicitly talking about okay, well, everything up to violence is okay, but violence isn't the answer. Even if you're advocating for it, and the reason why you're talking about it is coming at it from a different angle, what it results in is saying, make this a little bit easier to sweep under the rug.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I think that's actually a pretty good point that sums up sort of the commonality of it, right? Because they can say lots of different things. And if you... I can't ascribe an intention without getting inside their heads, but this is the one sort of single thing that unifies it pretty much.
Yeah. And, in the same way that no group is a monolith, right? The people complaining about it are all complaining for different reasons, right? You see a variety of responses that are different, where different elements of them are good and different elements of them are bad, and there's not a sort of uniformity to the response, right? Where you see people like, Obama's response, right? Which had a lot of good in it, but also really said stop just shy of saying, rioting was okay, right?
Right.
Was just okay, we'll support everything exactly up to the rioting, right? Which is the very sort of is where he was positioned while he was in office and where he is still now, which is very sort of moderate.
I think there's parts of it where it's pretty easy to say this is wrong, and it's clearer and more obvious to people than it was a year ago or even 2 weeks ago. And when you get to the rioting, I think that's where reasonable people can disagree still. But the rest of it, it's pretty straightforward. And that's why, this is why I think the NFL, it's almost like an act in three parts. So the first act was Colin Kaepernick being blackballed, the NFL not standing up for it, at one point playing with the idea of banning any kind of show or any kind of protest during the national anthem. And I think the compromise at one point was that as long as you're on the field, you had to stand. Your option was to be off the field. And then initially, the NFL came out with a statement, and I want to read this because it would be funny if it weren't so sad. So the NFL family is greatly saddened by the tragic events across our country, and that was Goodell, who's the commissioner of NFL. The protesters' reactions to these incidents reflect the pain, anger, and frustration that so many of us feel. Our deepest condolences go out to the family of Mr. George Floyd and to those who have lost loved ones, including the families of Ms. Breonna Taylor in Louisville and Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, the cousin of Tracy Walker of the Detroit Lions. As current events dramatically underscore, there remains much more to do as a country and as a league. These tragedies inform the NFL's commitment in our ongoing efforts. There remains an urgent need for action. We recognize the power of our platform in communities and as part of the fabric of American society. We embrace that responsibility and are committed to continuing the important work to address these systemic issues together with our players, clubs, and partners. So this was part two. Part one was don't protest during the national anthem.
Yeah.
And Colin Kaepernick could not get a job. And I can't believe that there are that many backup quarterbacks that are better than a contributor to a Super Bowl win than that would reasonably keep somebody out. Now, listen, you make that argument a few years later, he hasn't been in the game for a while. All right, so it makes more sense, but it started with that. And this is a totally tone-deaf response when you try. It's like all those, corporate America.
It's like when the Washington Redskins account posted a Blackout Tuesday thing.
Oh, God, yes.
And then everybody just said, hey, this looks like parody, right? It's ridiculous how you can have that name and that logo and then, try to stand in solidarity for Blackout Tuesday like you care. Right, about racial causes.
Right, because it's just participation. It's a complete lack of insight.
Yeah.
And just going along for the sake of going along, not because there's actual support of the underlying issue. Because really, so it's the whole problem people have had with or not the whole problem. One of the problems that people have been very vocal about saying Black Lives Matter, the response being all lives matter.
Oh my God.
Or
yeah.
blue lives matter. I mean, people aren't born police. It's a job that you pick.
Yeah.
And the problem is, it's that black lives matter too.
Yeah.
And it's implied, obviously. And it's not that it's only black lives matter. All marginalized people's lives matter.
Yeah.
So that's in First Nations, Indigenous. I mean, that speaks to the names of some of the NFL teams. I mean, it's Kansas City Chiefs, less obviously so, but
it's people invading a space and starting conversations that would be fine if they had some basis in and of themselves. Right. It's like when somebody talks about sexual assault against women, and then somebody else tries to come in and say, men get sexually assaulted too. And it's like, yeah, that's great. You should have a conversation about that another time.
Yes.
Right? If you are saying, this group of people's lives matter, if you were trying to, have a discussion or shape the way that culture sees people losing their lives who are losing their lives unnecessarily, then that's great. Have that discussion.
Yeah.
But it's not, you don't bring it up to detract from what somebody else is talking about.
Because that next step is only a natural follow-up once you've actually fixed the original problem.
Yeah.
So once you've stopped all smoking and all the lung cancer cases that are caused by smoking are gone, then you can say, oh, but there's these other reasons why you have trouble with lung cancer, and then like radon and stuff. Anyways,
you deal with the biggest issue first. Nobody's saying that the other people who are being killed without cause by the police are less important than anybody else who's being killed without cause by the police. Right. All of those police killings are terrible, but we're talking about what's relevant, and those people, the people who actually have things to say, are by and large standing in solidarity. They're not trying to hijack the conversation. Right. The people that are hijacking the conversation are people who don't actually have any stake in it at any level. They're not saying all lives matter because they need to be. There's no reason for them to be saying those words.
Right. I mean, it is ironic actually that with the protests against police brutality have triggered so much more police brutality. It's almost like the police weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
And if this is them on good behavior with cameras trained on them and journalists watching them, what the hell has been happening when everybody didn't have cameras in their pockets to document everything, not everything, some of what's been happening?
Well, what's terrible too is I've seen a lot of people talking about when they talk about the police violence, how they're responding to violent protesters. And it's wrong on so many levels. And so the criminal code in America, when you assault an officer, you get fined under the title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both, right? And where such acts involve physical contact with the victim of that assault or the intent to commit another felony, be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 8 years or both. And then if it's a deadly weapon, it's more than that. Nowhere in the criminal code, the punishment for even if you take for granted that they are assaulting officers, right? As a group, right? If you treat them like a group and say, well, they're all assaulting officers because, one person or a couple people threw a water bottle or shot some fireworks at them. What the punishment is fines and prison time. What the punishment is not is being attacked by people in riot gear in the streets. That is not what the response is. So on the first level, even if you take everything that the detractors from the protesters are saying is true, the response is still ridiculous.
Yes.
And then when you take a step back at that and you look at the fact there are civilians, protesting civilians, some peacefully, some not peacefully protesting, right? And even though I'm not even sure that distinction needs to be made, who are being killed by police right now. What you don't see is anything about police being killed or injured because they are in full riot gear, and the things that is happening.
One.
Okay, yeah.
I think it was in Baltimore.
So, okay, you're right. I shouldn't make any sweeping statements because you'll be able to find, the minority of examples, but there's tons of people being injured by police, and there are people being killed by police. And what is happening to police in almost every single case where people are calling things violent protesters are like people getting in their faces, maybe shoving them around, throwing water bottles at them, and like shooting fireworks off at them.
And sometimes just walking down the street.
Yeah. And no matter what when you look at all these examples, the response has always been disproportionate.
That's the perfect word, disproportionate. That's exactly what I was saying.
Yeah, and you're not looking at people on a level playing field. Getting a water bottle thrown at you by a single protester when you are in full riot gear, and you maybe at the worst feel and probably hear more than feel like the thunk of something hitting you.
Right.
That is not the appropriate response to that is not batoning people down, is not shooting tear gas at them, right? All of these things are totally, absolutely obscene responses and are operating outside of what's supposed to be the appropriate legal recourse, right? This is not justice in any sense of the word.
Right.
It's not reasonable. It's not fair. They're not commensurable things that are happening.
I think commensurate's right.
They're not commensurate things that are happening. And this is absolutely not what the law says the response should be.
Yeah.
It's what people, or what some people have come to believe is reasonable for the response to be.
Because we're used to it.
Yeah, it's what a lot of people have gotten used to, but this is absolutely not what's supposed to be happening.
Right.
On the police's side.
It is a real injustice.
Yeah. Oh my god.
No, but I'm saying this is. I mean, people might say that. Well, this is not the place for it.
That's true. We're an injustice YouTube channel.
We are. You know what? I do want to get into it, but I don't want to take away from some of the things that we need to get around, because we did sort of not. I don't want to say skip, but we did participate in last week's
Blackout Tuesday.
Yeah. So we've got a few things that we wanted to get to. And maybe we can talk about it more, because I learned a bunch of things actually on Twitter that I wanted to go over.
Yeah.
Even just the last couple of days.
So we'll answer some questions now, but I hope where we stand on everything is clear. We stand with the protests, and that includes the people rioting. We understand that they're put in a difficult situation, and we think a lot. Like, I think I'm not going to speak for you. Actually, I can't say anything for you, but I think understanding the way violence is being used as a last resort and a tool of a group of people that has had no other way to be heard. And every way that they've been heard, when high profile people have talked about it, there's change hasn't been affected. And
right.
I think the only question that anybody is allowed to be asking about the riots is it effective, not is it justified?
Right.
Where, people who are inherently on the same side, who are looking for the best possible outcomes, I think there is discussions within, especially when you look at actual other Black voices, if they are talking about what is the best way to get what we need to do done. But I don't think it's fair to ask people, like, is it justified? Are they immoral? Do you, because it's just, this is what happens when you push people really, really hard and you don't give them any other options.
Right.
When they really have no other recourse, and it's happened, and at the end of the day, we side with the people who were on the right side of history, who reacted violently when they really needed to.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because that's one of the things I learned. But like I said, I want to make sure that I can sort of speak freely, not feel like we're in any kind of rush to get through some of the other stuff.
To the questions now, bit of a weird shift in tone.
So I should mark off 18.5 minutes. People want to skip to the 18.5 minute mark, and I'm going to put that in the description.
Yeah. So there we go, and we might come back to it depending on how the timing goes.
I plan on it. Yeah.
So our first question of the week comes from Awesome Gamer 241,
our
newest patron. Yeah, and so this is from a Patreon message, and they say, "Hello, BDCKR. Really love the videos on your channel and wanted to support you. Just a question: do you think an Injustice 3 mobile is released, and if it is, will you consider playing it and uploading it on your YouTube channel?" So that's a two-part question.
Yeah.
Do we think one will be released? And I think that depends very heavily on whether or not there's a third console game released. And
I think it seems likely.
Yeah.
It's been a successful franchise. I think it's probably going to be released. And I think with the history, right, where originally Injustice, it wasn't Injustice 1 at the time, but the one that we still play was meant as an ad for the console game. And I think Injustice 2 seemed to be pushed more independently as its own revenue-generating thing.
Yeah. And so it seems like it would make sense for Injustice 3 to be released. If it ever is, I think that will definitely be, in the same way that they do with like Windows and software, where they phase out support for older versions.
Right.
It'll be something like that. And I hope if it is, they move closer back to what they did with Injustice 1 and more away from what they did with Injustice too, because it seems like for the work that they put in, there was a lot less payoff for players.
Yeah. I think I have enough loyalty to the whole DC brand and the characters that I'm totally willing to give it a shot.
Yeah.
My problem will potentially be that if it relies too much on pay to win, if it relies too much on having to play obsessively in order to make it, like if there's the potential for a casual player to enjoy it, I think I'm very likely to not only play it, but do content on it.
Yeah.
But if it pushes too hard on that, to me, that's where Injustice 2 failed. You could spend a lot of money, and even if you did spend a lot of money, the only way to be successful was to play it for hours. And if you didn't play it for hours a week, you would fall quickly behind and be frustrated. So for somebody with obsessive tendencies like me, I don't think I'd be getting a lot of joy out of it if Injustice 3 was like that.
Yeah. So there we go. Yeah, so I guess the short answer is it's coming out, although you never know until you know. Right. And would we consider making videos about it? Yeah, we almost certainly would. We're already considering making videos, right, for the theoretical future where it does come out. Yeah. But will that end up being something that we stick with long term the same way would depend very, very heavily on how they design the game. Yeah. And I guess the places in life that we're at when it comes out, right? Because that's always also subject to change. So there you go.
Because that's not something that you guys see, I guess, what our real life is like.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not just the game, it's really where it fits in with everything else.
Yeah, what's interesting is this summer, I've learned recently, and I can't share any more details, but I will be making a podcast, a separate podcast, that I can't actually share on this channel because it's going to be associated with a lot of personal information about me, and so I can't actually tell you guys about it without doxing myself.
Right. So it's a shame we can't leverage some of the attention that we get on this channel onto something else that's actually quite worthwhile.
And for anyone who really, really likes us, don't bother looking for it. It's going to be incredibly hard to find. So it's not like a sort of Easter egg hunt that is like a winnable challenge.
It's not a challenge. So nothing to be accepted.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's something. So I'm going to be doing actually a lot more speaking on Mike this summer, but you know, I wish I could share it with you guys. I wish I could somehow scrub personal data from it and then post it up on this channel, or even just advertise for it, because it's like free advertising for a thing that would be great if it did as well as possible.
Meaningful.
Yeah, but I can't because I don't want to dox myself. It's not a tease. I'm sorry. I know some people, if anybody likes listening to us, might be like, oh, I want to follow you to your new project, and I'm very sorry for mentioning this.
I will get to follow. I will know.
Well, I don't know if that makes anybody feel any better. I don't think that's... Okay. There we go. So thanks for the question, and thanks for the support. Next question comes from Jacob Hall, or I guess this is a series of comments. They say, I found a glitch with Phantom Zone Crystal, and then later in a separate comment say, if you turn off internet the moment you see the crystal, you can reset the character role. I've done it twice on Android so far. And then in another comment, on Android, if you turn off Wi-Fi before the Phantom Zone Crystal is opened, if you clear data, you can redo the crystal for Phantom Zone. Yeah.
So this is, ever since iOS users posted about this is something that we tested relatively extensively.
Yeah.
And it only seemed like you could re-roll. So when we were doing that, it would show you a different reward every time. So if you got far enough into the game where it wouldn't crash, where it wouldn't say you don't have an internet connection. I can't remember what the message exactly was, but there's that message that says that you don't have an internet connection, and then it boots you out. Yeah. So if you go far enough and turn off your internet connection late enough, despite the internet connection being off, it will roll.
Yeah.
And you can re-roll it by resetting the game and going back in and doing it over and over and over again. And what would happen was, when you finally get something you wanted, you can check your collection, and what you actually had was the one that you got the first time.
I guess we should say that's been our experience with it. So even though we're fairly confident, we're not 100% sure it's possible, even though we think it's very unlikely that Jacob Hall actually did somehow work it out and on their device, or something about the specific timing that they're doing it works for them. And if so, we would love to see some sort of proof or confirmation,
documentation,
or even just a confirmation that you understand what we said here and that you checked in and it actually does work. But until then, based off of our personal experience, we understand why people would have the misconception that it did work, and not recognize that it didn't. So this is internally consistent with it still not being a functional glitch.
Right.
Yeah. So there we go. Our next question comes from DI Wackygaming, and they say, who are your top 3 favorite characters from Injustice?
So I think we sort of touched on this 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
I've got my top 4 characters from Injustice.
Oh, you do? Okay.
So one is Flash Prime, which is the Bronze Flash, because I played with him a lot, and he was my most important character. I think the character model is good.
Yeah.
I think the gameplay was good, and for the time when I was spending a lot of time playing with bronze characters and grinding Bonus Battle 1, favorite character. Regime Flash, because he was key to... I mean, back when we started playing, there weren't a lot of player guides. If there were any, they weren't very good. And I did spend a lot of time developing my silver team, and I had Green Arrow, Harley Quinn, and that was it, my 2 big silver characters. And I was lucky enough that when I got silver packs, I kept on getting copies of them, so I was able to promote them a bit. And then the next character that I bought intentionally with power credits, which was a big deal then, actually, because everything was power credits, was Regime Flash.
Yeah, so there we go.
Good character. And then my 3rd favorite character,
oh my god,
Elseworld Flash.
So it's all the Flashes that you played early. Yeah.
And you could, if anybody's been following this channel for a while, you could probably see it, right? That was our team. That was Elseworld Flash was a challenge character that never showed up in a challenge for Android.
Yes, that we got from the challenge packs.
So it's quite exciting to get him, and he was low stat, but it meant he matched it really well with Containment Doomsday. And also with my 4th favorite character, which was Regime Black Adam.
Yeah, which was our first gold on the account when it was sort of my account, but we were only playing on one.
Yeah.
So it was like my account, but it was our account because you didn't have your own.
So I think it was celebrating some sort of anniversary or something where they gave I think 30,000.
It was like credits. 1 million players or something.
Okay.
It was like a thank you for like 1 million players. I don't remember. Yeah, and who was the one who gave it to you? I think it might have been Black Adam who gave it to you.
It might have been,
in the picture.
With the credits, it was enough to push to the first gold pack, discount gold pack, and that was the first gold character, and then it changed the game completely.
Well, what actually happened with that, which was really funny, is we played it on really bad Wi-Fi.
Yes.
And that was the first ever time we ever used a glitch, was actually right when we started playing.
Unintentionally.
Unreproducible. And we duplicated the rewards from it. So every time we left the game and joined back in, we got the rewards again for a little while. The first time it happened accidentally, and then after that I used it a couple more times until it stopped working, and I got the reward I think 4 times. Right. And that was, it was maybe 3 times, because that was enough to get the 75,000 gold pack and then have another couple thousand, right?
Yeah.
To have another 15,000 left over. Yeah, so I was able to get the reward 3 times and then get a gold pack way early in the game, which was pretty cool. And then I remember when you got your own account, the way that you started out really fast was tying it with somebody else's
console unlocks.
So that you could get a couple of golds to start out with.
And they were the crap. I mean, it was Prison Superman.
Yeah, so our sort of early game experience was very different. I would say it's probably better for it to have 1 gold character and then a bunch of bronzes, because it's very sort of aspirational. It gives you something to look forward to, and it also lets you get over that initial hump of grinding just a little bit faster, but not for nearly as long. So there's a lot longer where you're making fast progress because you have a gold character, and then you still hit that wall and then it slows down. But by that point, you've got a lot of stuff already under your belt, which I think it was probably actually beneficial to your experience to be able to start like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think I guess it's not a surprise entirely. Those are my favorite characters, because really it is a game about nostalgia.
Yeah.
and the connection to the DC characters. I mean, because there was WWE Immortals, right? Very similar gameplay. Didn't care about as much. Mortal Kombat X, same. So the nostalgia I have for when we started playing the game, is it 5 or 6 years ago now? Yeah. So this is exactly.
I don't know if you remember when we first were playing off that one account, when we had characters that were earmarked for us so that we wouldn't use the energy. We wouldn't use each other's energy on the characters that we liked. Yes. So you had your team, and you weren't, like, I wasn't allowed to use those characters, and you weren't supposed to use any of the characters that I was using, so that when we each played, we each knew that there was people that were on our own personal timers for playing them.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
Yeah, good times. Now, we've got so much energy, it doesn't even matter. We bought recharges, right?
Yeah.
And we have a million that we had saved up from when we were doing the time moving glitch, right, to get energy instead of spending them. So yeah, but that was pretty fun. Mm-hmm. And a consideration that I also think not very many people have with the game, where you can't play some characters because your friend's gonna come on. And,
that's true.
And be mad that you used up all their energy.
Yeah. So that
Yeah. So there we go. Our next question, along the same lines, lets us bloviate more about our own opinions. Who's your guys' favorite supervillain from DC?
Do you want to go on this one first?
See, I'm not even 100% sure, because I think one of the issues with answering this question is that for how the core of characters has to remain the same, like elements of their aesthetic and elements of their backstory, so much of it depends on which iteration you're talking about and the writer, right? Yeah. Like,
the creative team is so important.
Yeah, in The Last Laugh, or no, what's it called?
Killing Joke.
Killing Joke, sorry, not Last Laugh, yeah. That's the passive of Killing Joke Joker, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Killing Joke Joker, right? Joker is a great villain in a story that, Batman in it doesn't even seem as much like a hero. Right? Where they're sort of, the nature of the relationship feels really sort of like inherently connected, right? Mm-hmm. Like two sides of the same coin sort of thing. And the way that they share that moment, right?
Yes.
Feels very much like it's less like a villain and a hero meeting each other and more just colleagues in a really, really strange sense, right?
Yeah.
So that, is obviously a really, really cool story in the DC universe, and the Joker in that is a really, like, weird sort of messed up character, right? And you have a lot of stuff where I think the best characters also are ones where it's not nearly as obvious whether they're a hero or a villain, like Swamp Thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, Swamp Thing is really a hero. I mean, he's tortured, but he's always been such a good guy. Yeah, I think your point about which iteration it is a really good one, because as the teams change, the nature of each character, whether it's the hero or the villain, changes a lot.
Yeah.
And I keep coming back to, I think The Killing Joke was a great story. Brian Boland did some spectacular art back when he was still doing more than just covers. Mm-hmm. But the one standout story, because it's an Alan Moore story, it's a Batman story too.
Yeah.
The villain is Clayface. I can't remember where I read it. It was, I think, maybe one of the annuals, and it was where Clayface had become caught up in a relationship with a department store mannequin. And it was the first time, I think, when I read a story and I looked at the villain, I said, wow, there is such untapped potential there. And it feels like we are really in the hands of a great writer. We've really seen what this gallery of villains has the potential to be when you can take a minor character like Clayface and make him so interesting. Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things, is that each sort of character in comics is almost like an archetype, right? Mm-hmm. More than they are like a consistent character that grows from a single point, and everywhere where they go is, you know, sort of a continuation of what happened just before them, right? Where in some ways they are, right? And past works influence future works. But I think for really almost anybody, you can find a compelling character in there because nobody is so set in their ways that you can't do something really interesting with them in the right hands, right?
Right.
And I think the only issues that you run into is when there's elements of their story that are so core to them that they naturally lead you to certain places, right? In the same way that, like, the way that Harley Quinn and her mistreatment by the Joker, I think, is really, really core to who she is, right? And so there's a definitely a limitation. You can only tell certain types of stories with certain characters' backstories, right? Mm-hmm. But I think past that, you can do almost anything with the characters.
And what you do with them is what makes them the most interesting.
Yeah.
More so than just character design.
So I think that's a really, really hard question to answer. I think probably the villain that I've seen the most done with that was been really good is the Joker, right?
Yeah.
And, the Christopher Nolan movies.
This is another good point, right? That the most with the heroes, they have ongoing series. You see them a lot. You see them the most. And it's the sort of the body of work that sometimes either it's your first impressions or certain strong impressions that you have of them, or their whole body of work that pushes you towards them, right? The same way that people maybe have allegiances to a sports team, even if the roster changes, that they still, if this is their favorite team, they're willing to stick with them through decades of change.
Yeah. So my answer is the Joker, but I think that there's a caveat, which is that I don't consume a huge amount of DC and superhero media. Mm-hmm. So it's entirely possible that they would not. And it's really just a question of the fact that because the Joker is popular enough and there's been enough good stuff where the Joker is the villain, that's the reason why. And I think that that almost feels incomplete to me because it feels like it's too generic, and that could just as easily have been anybody else who was, who I happen to be able to read some really good stories about. And I'm sure there's a lot of really good portrayals of villains in the DC universe in different places if I, had the time or energy to go digging for them, right? And I'm sure I'd be able to find some new favorites too.
And so in that same vein, my favorite is going to be Clayface, because I haven't seen many other depictions of him, and based on that one that left such a strong impression on me.
He's 1 for 1.
He's 1 for 1. He's totally 1 for 1.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. So there we go. Next question comes from Ian Connor, and they say, "Hey BDCKR, first off, I love the vids and keep up the great work. Secondly, I was wondering if you guys could help me gear some teams. I'm gearing them towards multiplayer, and you can use any piece of gear in the game. You could be as vague as Special Specialist or Astro Harness, or as specific as each gear per person. Here are the teams: Earth 2 Flash, the Earth 2 team, which comes with Earth 2 Flash, Solomon Grundy, and Hawkgirl. The Arkham Knight team with Killer Croc, Arkham Knight, the Arkham Knight, and Arkham Knight Batgirl. Blackest Night team with Hawkgirl, Flash, and Superman, and the Rebirth team with Raven, Jessica Cruz, and Green Arrow." So there we go.
Yeah, I think I'd be more confident making comments about this if I actually played the teams more.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe we'll just throw out some specific strong ideas about the theme.
Yeah.
As a starting point. And then you always need to make adjustments once you've played with them a bit.
Mm-hmm. I think that makes sense. So I think the easiest thing to say is that everybody needs Special Specialist, and everybody needs, Tantu Totem on their Special Specialist.
Right, and it you can't get away from that, especially now since we're in the middle of Tantu Totem season, and we're watching a bunch of fights from the Tantu Totem season.
Yeah.
A Special Specialist is required, and when you look at your team, you got to think, who is going to be my Special Specialist?
Yeah, and Tantu Totem is 100% required on the Special Specialist, and I would say Master's Death card is probably, 90% if you have it, right? There's a very low chance that you're not going to want to put Master's Death card, I think, on it, too.
Right. So let's start off Earth 2 team. So we did an Earth 2 team, and I think it's actually better with Killer Frost instead of Hawkgirl. And there's going to be a link in the video. So what's that? 39 minutes. I gotta remember to put the link up in the video. So sure, there's a benefit to having one more character with extra stun, because if you look at her passive, concussive blow, each special and combo enter.
When you say her there, you mean Hawkgirl.
Hawkgirl, yeah. has a 30% chance to stun an opponent. Hawkgirl deals plus 100% more damage against stunned opponents, and additional plus 25% for each Earth 2 teammate. So, yeah, it's great to do more damage. Yeah, it's great to stun more often. But I think it's even better to reduce your opponents to almost 0 power generation. And if you replace Hawkgirl with Killer Frost, and you've got Solomon Grundy there, you take away the single most, or not take away, but you reduce the single most powerful weapon, which is power.
Yeah.
And especially in a game with Tantu Totem where you get to decide when you tag in your Tantu Totem person, but the AI doesn't, it seems like it's still random, right? They don't tag them in the best kind of
circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
So what you've done really is you've crippled the other team way more than you would by just having a special that happens to do more damage if you stun 30% of the time.
Yeah.
What was the next team? Or two? Arkham Knight team. All right. So we've already done, I think, a similar Arkham Knight team, but we had Arkham Knight Catwoman instead of Arkham Knight. Mm-hmm. And I guess you...
So yeah, we'll link that.
Yeah. So you got to think, to me, you got to think about what you're going to take advantage of the team to make it the most interesting. Which passives, which abilities. And Killer Croc is a tank, and he's slow. If he's going to be on your team, chances are he's not going to be a very good specialist. Chances are he's not going to be a good basic damage dealer. He's a tank. And a really good tank, like Killer Croc has the potential to be, is the best complement to good damage over time damage dealer. Because you don't want to be a specialist, because then he's got to be on the screen doing stuff. If he's off the screen and his teammate does specials, he'll still build up armor.
Yeah.
So it made a lot more sense for us to have Arkham Knight Catwoman because it's so much fun to bleed out your opponents where they can't do anything but, so that even if they tag out, you can still watch their health ticking off while they're off screen.
Yeah.
And I know it's harder because of Blackest Night Flash, where if your team is totally centered around damage over time, but it doesn't change that it's still so much fun. It's when you stack Arkham Knight Catwoman's bleed a couple times. She's got a couple teammates, and let's say you give her another piece of gear that does damage over time. It's amazing how it's like their health just melts away, and there's more joy in that to me than to knowing that I'm going to be able to win every game, or the chance that I'm going to lose against Blackest Night Flash team. Yeah. Oh, speaking of Blackest Night, that was the next team, right?
Yeah.
So really Flash is a star. The Blackest Night I think is overall kind of a defensive team where Hawkgirl gives a revive, but Flash is really the tank. And in my mind, if you're going to make him the tank, you want to give him one more life to take advantage of his passive where he gets full health back.
Yeah.
And I think Necron's Scythe is best because it only takes one slot. It has some offensive potential and way more offensive potential than 2 pieces of Fourth World Gear Set, which would take up 2 slots. And then you've got to decide with that team who's going to be your main damage dealer. This is the problem, right? Flash is the best guy because he can, like when you're facing him, who's the most frustrating on the team? It's Flash. But the frustration comes because the fight takes a long time because it's a defensive team, and when you're playing with them, you need to have somebody doing damage. And if you're making him your damage dealer, then you can't do more than one slot to give him another revive. And then you decide if you want to play him as a basic damage dealer, which I like to do with all my Flashes, or whether you pick one of the other teammates. But Blackest Night Batman, I think, is important for the... Is he the one that gives the unblockable special one?
Oh, God.
I can't remember now. I mean, clearly we don't play with that team enough.
Yeah.
But you've got to decide who's going to be your specialist and where the... how you're going to take the most advantage of the Flash. I mean, Flash, you got still 2 gear slots to make him stronger. But the issue is that even if he was a great basic damage dealer, because of Tantu Totem, your team is going to be way faster if you focus more on the specialist. And was there any team left? Was that it?
Rebirth. Oh, no.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Rebirth. Right. So, out of those guys, the only one I've played with a lot is maybe Jessica Cruz. And I think she needs to be the basic damage dealer because she's got the multiple hit combo ender, which potentially gives you an effect just like a stun.
Yeah.
And yes, you can make the argument that when she does a special, because she's got the rebirth teammates, I think she does more hits. But you don't need all those extra hits on a basic damage dealer if you're using both Tantu Totem and Master's Death card.
Yeah.
Doing special 2s over and over, and she's a great character to come in at the end to really mop up if you need her against somebody where you can't do your specials. And I'm struggling to come up with an idea when, but to me, Jessica Cruz, you're wasting her if you're not using her for basic damage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So there we go. Our next question comes from Yale Olivio, and they say, "Hey guys,
Olivo? Is there a second?
No, it's just Olivo. Sorry, I'm just adding letters and syllables left and right. Yeah, just really whenever the mood strikes me." And they say, "Hey guys, I just started a new account. Literally, I just have 4 bronze characters. What recommendations do you give me? Should I save everything to buy gold, Doomsday, or Batman, or is it better to buy packs?" And this is one of those questions. A lot of times we have to waffle, right? This one's pretty easy to answer.
Well, it's sort of easy. It was easier to answer, and it's changed a lot because the answer used to be 100% packs.
Yeah.
When there was a daily challenge pack that was 75,000 credits, and you could, for the price of Doomsday, which was just over 200,000 credits, you could get almost 3 other gold characters.
Yeah.
And having 3 gold characters, or what we call 3 gold equivalents, right? Like if you got 3 copies of the same character, you could have them at E2, or you could have just 3 at E0.
Yeah.
3 gold characters were great for grinding. If you had 3 teams of 3 gold equivalents each, then you could basically play as much as you want, grind as fast as you want. By the time you ran out of energy, you probably ran out of time to play.
Yeah.
And you just keep on playing and grinding and get up to bonus battle 6, and at that point you'd have to make a decision.
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, the lack of discount gold packs means that it does add up faster. The answer is still packs, but it's a little bit less packs than it was before.
Yeah, and it also, I guess, depends on whether you're willing to time shift over and over again, because if you are, then Doomsday is probably a little bit better because he's got a great passive that makes it easy in offline play because every time you knock somebody out, you get your health back, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes a lot hardier. Good character, strong, and compared to the current challenge characters, he's actually pretty reasonably priced. But Doomsday, yeah, definitely a good character. Because here's the thing, when you're playing offline and you don't have a lot of gear, there's a really good chance that no matter how good your character is, you're going to be taking some damage during the fight, and then you're going to need the rest of your team. Doomsday really can carry a team in offline play.
Yeah. So there we go. I think the answer is still packs, but if you really would prefer Doomsday, I think it makes sense to get Doomsday a lot earlier than it would have otherwise without the discount gold packs. You get a couple gold characters first, but buying Doomsday directly does actually sort of make sense.
Yeah.
In the medium term.
Yeah.
So there we go. Okay. That's the end of our questions.
And that's the end of the game sort of content. So if you want to skip over this too, but that's
the end of talking about the injustice that you can get on the Play Store, and now we're going to start talking about the injustice that's happening in the world.
So, like you said earlier, I think it's actually absolutely 100% right that there's other voices that can explain things better. But I want to share this thing that I learned on Twitter. So Twitter is for olds, but you've told me it's not really for olds. It's for sort of everybody.
For everybody. Yeah. So we're rebroadcasting here the voice of somebody who is better suited to talk about this stuff.
We're signal boosting.
Yeah.
That's the term. So there's somebody on Twitter.
Somebody who has a much bigger signal than us.
Yeah, actually that is true. Michael Harriet. But I think what we can do is maybe boost it in an area where it's not reaching, right? So it's we're like a Wi-Fi extender.
Yeah, so that's Michael Harriet at Michael Harriet, and that's Michael with the AEL at the end. So MICHAELHARRIOT is Michael Harriet.
Harriet with an A instead of E.
Yes.
All right, so I want to read his tweets because it's illuminating.
So this is his words.
So much of history has been whitewashed for the sake of making it palatable for white consumption that we are starting to perpetuate things that are not only misconceptions, but outright lies. A lot of what you're told about protests, Martin Luther King, etc., is wrong. A thread. I drove past a protest on the lawn of a local police department on Saturday and later saw a news report that described it as peaceful and nonviolent and said Martin Luther King would be proud. Not really, though. That wasn't really Martin Luther King's thing. I get it. No one mentions MLK without mentioning his stance on nonviolence, but that's not really how MLK worked. MLK used two phrases to describe his work more than any other. 1, direct action. 2, civil disobedience. Contrary to what you've been told, Martin Luther King wasn't about marching and protesting to bring awareness to a cause. Every move he made was a calculated, strategic move towards a direct goal. Sorry, guys. Martin Luther King wasn't about going to protest in a designated area and playing by the rules. His goal was to make people uncomfortable and cause chaos. He advocated breaking the law. It's almost like no one ever read the letter from a Birmingham jail where he said all of this, and I'm just going to quote even more. Like, this is sort of a nested quote inside a quote.
Is Martin Luther King now.
Yeah. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Non-violent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and fosters such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the non-violent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, non-violent tension which is necessary for growth. Mm-hmm. So that's, now we get back to Michael Harriot. He didn't want to be violent, but he wanted to be contentious. They wanted a confrontation. It was part of the plan. John Lewis calls it good trouble. You can't have civil disobedience without disobedience. For example, the Montgomery bus boycott was an effort to impose an economic sanction on the bus company. The state strictly forbade them from organizing boycotts, but they did it anyway. It was a direct action against the rule, not a symbolic gesture. The black people in Montgomery paid for the buses that dehumanized them. It wasn't a demonstration for demonstration's sake. And it was only part of a strategy that included NAACP attorney Fred Gray filing the lawsuit Browder versus Gale to stop segregation on city buses.
I think people tend to say NAACP.
Is it? All right, so I'm totally not. I'm not with it. Yeah, I'm not hip. And despite what you were taught, the Montgomery bus boycott didn't end segregation on Montgomery city buses. It was the court case that changed the city buses. Kinda. See, the untold story of the Montgomery bus boycott is that it didn't stop segregation on Montgomery buses. 2 days after the boycott ended, a white supremacist fired a shotgun at Martin Luther King. The next day, on Christmas Eve, a black girl was attacked for riding a bus. 4 days after that, racists attacked 2 buses and shot a pregnant woman. 2 weeks later, the Klan started bombing black churches. So what happened? Well, the city stopped bus services. And when it resumed, guess what happened? Rosa Parks had to leave the city. And black people started sitting on the back of the buses just to be safe. Black people didn't really sit anywhere on city buses until the 70s. What did you learn about Selma to Montgomery March on Bloody Sunday? That black people in Alabama tried to march for voting rights, but Alabama state troopers attacked. Then they marched again, and Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. But that's not really what happened. The Selma to Montgomery March wasn't a symbolic demonstration. It wasn't even an original idea. See, black people all over Alabama were attacked when they tried to register to vote. So local organizers would get large groups of people to march to their respective courthouses. That's how those marches started. They weren't protesting. They were going to register. And then they figured, if we're in a group, they can't beat us all. But y'all know white people. They will definitely try their best. I think they call it American exceptionalism. They were headed to Montgomery to confront the governor in person and demand their right to vote when Bloody Sunday happened. And here's the part about the Selma to Montgomery marches most people are never told. It was not nonviolent. See, after Bloody Sunday, Martin Luther King came down to organize a second march. But the same state troopers still planned to open a can of whip ass. So what did Martin Luther King do? He turned the whole march around. That's where James Foreman came in. James Foreman is one of the civil rights leaders you don't hear about because he wasn't with that getting his skull cracked crap. Plus, he never wore a civil rights suit. He wore overalls. Foreman often disagreed with Martin Luther King because he figured, you don't even go here. Why be nonviolent in the face of violence? Plus, he thought Martin Luther King was a figurehead who didn't understand what people on the ground knew. They were never going to get their voting rights unless they fought back. So Foreman's peeps, along with some students from Tuskegee who weren't about that crap, said, screw this, we're getting across that bridge. So on the third march, Foreman and his folks had bricks, sticks, and dress cans of whip ass for the cops. They made it across. Many of the politicians who voted for the Voting Rights Act said this was the thing that made them vote for it, the fact that we were fighting back. It wasn't nonviolence. It was, in part, the prospect of violence that passed the VRA. Now, Foreman was friends with Robert F. Williams, who is in my top 5 civil rights heroes of all time. Simply put, Robert F. Williams was a bad MFer. But before I begin, I want to tell you about one of the craziest stories in the entire civil rights movement. In 1958, a 7-year-old white girl named Sissy Marcus told her parents that she had kissed 2 black boys on their cheeks. Her parents told the police. The police arrested the boys for rape. They were 7 and 9 years old. This happened in Monroe, North Carolina, which had one of the largest chapters of the Ku Klux Klan in the country. In a town of 12,000, the chapter had a reported 7,500 members. The town also had a large NAACP chapter. And the reason why was important. Robert F. Williams had served in the Marines. When he returned from World War II, he joined the NAACP, but they barely had any members because the people were afraid of the Klan. So Robert F. Williams decided to do something about it. He built an army. He organized 50 to 60 black men and created the Black Armed Guard. We often talk about the Deacons for Defense and the Panthers, but the Black Armed Guard was perhaps the most influential of these groups. In 1957, the Ku Klux Klan decided to attack the NAACP vice president, who was also the town's only black physician. They went to the house to do a drive-by and saw it was surrounded with sandbags to stop the gunfire. But the Klansmen fired anyway. But it wasn't just sandbags. The Black Armed Guard was waiting behind the sandbags and opened fire on the KKK. Not only did the Klan never mess with the NAACP in Monroe again, but the city passed an ordinance that required the Klan to get a permit every time they wanted to meet. So when the boys were arrested in the kissing case, Robert F. Williams got the whole world involved. Police beat the boys for a week until they confessed. A judge sentenced the boys to imprisonment until they were adults. But Williams got the whole world involved, and the Black Armed Guard protected the boys' parents. They literally had shootouts with the Klan. The parents of the kids said they had to sweep mounds of bullets off their porches. Eleanor Roosevelt spoke out. So did leaders across the world. After a year, the boys were pardoned by the governor because no judge would overturn the sentence. The city and the state have still never apologized. But this is what made Monroe, North Carolina, one of the hubs of the civil rights movement. It became the home base for the Freedom Riders because the KKK knew not to mess with the Black Armed Guard. In fact, the whole black section of Monroe basically just stopped letting white people enter. Then one night, in 1961, a white couple got lost in the black part of town in Monroe. Robert told them to stay at his house because he didn't want them to run into anyone who mistook them for Klansmen. The couple were grateful. But the Ku Klux Klan, police, and Hoover's FBI convinced the couple to say Williams had kidnapped them. The FBI put out a warrant, but people across the U.S. helped him escape to Cuba. He wrote the book Negroes with Guns that influenced the Panthers. When he returned in 1969, North Carolina dropped all charges after activists rallied support. Williams died in 1996. There were a lot of people who eulogized him at his funeral, and a lot of info came out. It turns out Williams was in Selma at that third bridge crossing with his homeboy, James Foreman. He had protected the Freedom Riders. He had protected the Kissing Case boys. And there was a woman from Alabama who said that he was the one who made her feel safe. Now, this woman was a lifelong activist, but she was mostly a radical. She was raised in the Marcus Garvey movement. She always fought for her people and was known as not being scared of crap. But at the funeral, she said she might not have been able to do what she did if Robert Williams, her lifelong friend, had always promised that no one would ever hurt her. And he lived up to her promise. And that's why she was able to be brave. Her name was Rosa Parks. And then he links to a video where Robert Williams explains why history gets whitewashed like that. And it ties in, I think, nicely with your earlier comment about how, maybe it wasn't in this video, but we were talking about it earlier, about the idea that part of whitewashing history like that is to make white people comfortable with the idea that being quiet and being polite is what gets things done, to try to keep people from protesting, to keep them from rioting, to say, hey, just wait a little bit. If you do things right, things will take care of themselves. Be patient. You don't need to make you don't have to be confrontational. You don't have to do whatever, right? It's a way to appease the masses.
It's people who are used to the phrase violence is never the answer because they live in a world where for them violence never has to be the answer.
Right.
Right? And it's not applicable to everybody else around them. And some people just don't get that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there we go. That's...
I'd never heard of Robert Williams before. He seems like a real stand-up hero. Like, he's like... I teared up a little bit when I realized that this was... He was the reason, when Rosa Parks gave the eulogy, that he was the reason why she felt safe enough to stand up and become an icon for this moment in history that she was... I don't even know how to put it. Like, she obviously she's the face of it, but it shows you that there's so much more behind the scenes leading up to the stuff that we all remember. Yeah.
And so, in future weeks, I guess as things develop, we might be talking more about this. But I think, personally, even if it doesn't end up making it to this content, we're going to be trying to make sure to continue to be educated and look at what needs to be done and be a part of that. We, highly, highly recommend that everybody watching this, and I think anybody who's watched all the way through to this point especially, will already sort of understand the importance of that, and will do that with us, and, help be part of the work that everyone's doing right now, and continue to, and make sure that the momentum that these movements are getting right now doesn't slow down, right? And make sure that we can, as best as possible, and we're not gonna, just fix it, right? It's not, this is not something that we just work at hard enough and then it is just fixed at any specific point in time, but that we continue to put the work in and make things better.
But I think maybe we've reached a critical point where, and we don't have enough time to talk about it this week, but maybe next week, the idea of defunding the police, which is no longer just some sort of radical rallying point, but a real, possibly doable plan for fixing things.
Okay, I guess that's the teaser for next week. Next week on this podcast that was originally about video games, we talk about defunding the police and what that means.
But it's always been about injustice.
That's true. Yeah, so there we go. That's a great point, I think, to end this off on. So to finish off, we've got some people's names to say. So quick shout out to Eliza, I just got a Greek mouse. Caton, she fed a cheese. And this shout out has been brought to you by Eliza, who came up with the joke and then insisted that it be this week's shout out. We'd also like to thank everybody who is supporting us on Patreon. So that's a huge thank you to Console Peasant and Edwoon, who are supporting us at the highest tier Last Word, Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message tier, Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., and Irvin Ruiz, who are supporting us on the credited level, and Chris Wolf, Scarlet NB, and Awesome Gamer 241 at the gratitude level. Thanks so much for your support, and thanks so much to all of you for watching. We'll see you next time. Komoda.